Hey everyone, welcome to Operations, the show where we look under the hood of companies in hypergrowth. My name is Sean Lane. An interesting pattern has emerged when I talk to companies now. I find it's much more common for CEOs and revenue leaders to tell me right away that they are explicitly a product-led company or they are specifically a sales-led company when it comes to their go-to-market. The concepts aren't new, people are just more binary and vocal about their approach. But like most business models, the ideas of product-led and sales-led growth exist on a spectrum. Pure PLG that is entirely self-serve, no humans, it's pretty rare. Even companies that you think of as being primarily self-serve, Slack, Zoom, Dropbox, Calendly, they still have a version of their sales process that is led by humans. This is an interesting spectrum to navigate if you're an operator within those companies trying to figure out the sweet spot for your particular product and your go-to-market motions. The good news is we don't have to speculate anymore about what navigating that spectrum is like, because on this episode, we're going to go deep on one such example, Canva. Our guide in that exploration is Aarti Raman, former global head of revenue strategy and operations at the design company, reportedly valued at more than $30 billion. The story of Canva's sales motions is a fascinating one. When Aarti arrived in 2022, the company had already crossed $1 billion in ARR, not valuation, ARR, largely through B2C, bottoms-up, product-led adoption models. But their B2B enterprise sales-led model was much less mature. In our conversation, Aarti reveals the thinking behind shifting their enterprise B2B from sales-led to product-led. We talk about how to pull off pricing changes at a company of Canva's scale, and why, even at their size, you still have to argue about what a PQL is. To start, I asked Aarti to take me back to when she first arrived at the company, and they were making the decision to move the B2B team from a sales-led model to a product-led model.
Rewind back about 2 years, and Canva even then had really strong bottoms-up adoption. So it was already over $1 billion in ARR, all from bottoms-up adoption. So really strong product usage. People love the product. But obviously, having traction in B2B with enterprise customers is super important to investors for long-term stickiness and growth. But that side of the house, as is common in many companies with a strong B2C base but evolving in B2B, was pretty nascent. So there had been several iterations on the right B2B model. And what had been in place for several years prior to 2022 was a very traditional sales-led model. So what that meant is there was actually, for the enterprise product, no way for a prospect to even try the offering for free. Like there was no free trial, no freemium. So although there were all these pockets of organic usage, there was no way that could seamlessly lead to enterprise-wide adoption. So it was a pretty traditional sales-led model. There was a contact sales button on the pricing page for anything enterprise related, and there was no standard enterprise pricing. So it was all sales-led. So sales would do things like offer steep discounts to sign deals early, just, whatever you can imagine from a very traditional sales-led structure, which over time the leadership team realized was at odds with their mission of empowering everyone in the world to design. So there was not much enterprise adoption. It wasn't aligned with the company's mission and goals. So the decision was made to start blank slate and see how do we kind of unify this very successful bottoms-up adoption with basically what we don't have at all on the B2B side. So the blank slate idea was we're going to make enterprise pricing super transparent. So everyone gets the same pricing. Yes, there were some tiers for large, people who wanted to purchase a lot of seats. But guidance from leadership was, first, everything should be super transparent. It should be super joyful, easy, transparent pricing. That was number one. And the second was, we have to leverage this massive bottoms up adoption to kind of drive value for enterprise customers. So there were some high level directives like that given from the top. And then operationalizing that was kind of left to the go to market engine. So where, so yeah, so that's kind of like a little bit of context of where Canva was at that time and like what the leadership team's vision was. So I'll just pause there to see whether, that kind of answered your first question.
I want to learn a whole bunch more about how you operationalize that. But like, even some of the questions that you just said were posed at that time were probably potentially hairy questions, right? So the first is hairy. Like this idea of the bottoms up versus the tops down. It sounds like, and just so I can understand and make it real for people, if you worked at a company in an enterprise that one of your peers was using Canva and you were using Canva, like at that moment in time, just even the two of you being in the same instance was not possible.
I mean, it was possible. Like, for example, if I
went through the funnel.
Exactly, yeah. So I'll just clarify that a little bit. So let's say I work at Google and you work at Google too, although I never have and you probably haven't either. I might, with my Google email, sign up for Canva. You might do the same with your Google email for a separate team at Google. There was no way we could like unify our teams, right? Unless we both contacted sales. And then, and then sales would say, hey, you're at the pro pricing, but if you sign a deal tomorrow, I'll get you on this much reduced pricing. So there was no unified framework, so to speak, on like a flow, right? Like, or if sales saw 5 different pockets of usage and this usage threshold occurred, there would be an automated sequence. No, none of that. It was all very like manual and left to the discretion of sales. So as a small team at Google, both of us probably had good user experiences because the bottoms up like product experience is great. But like the process of getting to an enterprise-wide adoption was not.
I'll remind you that this was all at $1 billion in ARR. That's crazy. It's also a testament to how far an amazing product can get you. And for what it's worth, of all the reasons that Aarti outlined, I totally buy why Canva should make this change. It makes total sense. But I'd also imagine that making a go-to-market change of this magnitude at a company with $1 billion in ARR is going to be met with some reservations. Pricing changes at a small startup can be contentious, never mind the types of pricing standardization that she's talking about putting on enterprise B2B reps. More on that later, by the way. I posed to her that I imagined that this was a difficult time to navigate.
You nailed it. Yeah. And then as we talk about the long-term evolution of this whole journey, some of that will come up as well. But yes, there were lots of concerns at first because obviously this is a massive change and the devil is always in the details, right? So the first, yes, it's still, even in like, if you look at Canva's product and pricing today, it's different from what it was when the change was first made. Right? So the goal of the leadership team was to just have 3 SKUs then: Canva Free, Canva Pro, which was like for small teams, and Canva Teams. And Canva Teams could be used for your little local coffee store with 4 people who want to put out little flyers, and also for like your Googles or your, your like large company. So it's basically like, it was just these 3 super simple SKUs. So that caused some panic with sales, right? They're like, how do I differentiate, how do I differentiate like an enterprise offering from like a regular Teams offering? And then, even in that, they were like maybe a little less concerned about the impact to like completely new prospects, because you could kind of start from scratch there. The biggest concern was for existing customers, because there were a handful of like fairly large customers who had been given like discounted pricing. And while the Teams pricing was still pretty cheap compared to like a regular like enterprise type pricing of like Adobe or some other like similar, a competitor offering like a somewhat similar product, because of all the lack of transparency. Like although the pricing on average would be cheaper, like some customers, some teams would experience some increases or some changes. So there was a lot of panic on what would happen to existing customers. And also generally, obviously, when anything changes, the question is, what about my incentive plan? Like, what about my commission, right? Like, what about this deal I just negotiated? So there was a lot of like, hey, what's going to happen to my existing customers? And B, how is this going to impact me? So that was kind of all the, I mean, I wouldn't say it was holdouts, because people knew that like this was going to be a positive change long term, but it was like, this is so, where we are is so different now. How do we get there? So there was a lot of concern around that for sure.
All right, so let's talk about where we are now and how we get there, right? You mentioned the idea of, okay, this decision gets made, and then you're sitting there with the responsibility to operationalize all of this. Where did you start? How did you pull that off?
Yeah. So the first thing that we got tops down, aside from like the high level directive, is this new pricing, right? Like it's, hey, all enterprise customers will be on the same pricing. And here's kind of like the website, the pricing page, and the contact sales button is gone. So those are like but at a very basic level, like the directive from like top down. So then what we had to figure out, and I think one good thing that happened is, from the time that change happened, for the next up until the end of that fiscal year, all sales reps were put on a guarantee. So essentially, because we knew that for the next like 6 to 7 months, everything was going to be thrown up in the air. We wanted everyone to be brought on the journey together. So I think this is a fairly, I mean, it was a good decision for all concerned, because we wanted sales to be a part of this experiment. We were like, for the next, and that was kind of around the time I was brought in, for the next like 6 to 8 months, to just keep everyone on a guarantee. Maybe do some like spiffs or contests like here and there once we have a better sense of the metrics. But for now, to ease people's concern and pivot them to this new motion, put them on a guarantee. So that was just, so people are like, okay, like my pay, but while there's no upside anymore, but my pay is guaranteed. So that was one thing that happened, which was good. The next thing that happened is really like a framework had to be put in place. And it's all still like the strategy that we had to do and not get the operationalization. But like we had to think about, let's make a few like scenarios. What do we do with brand new customers, new or like prospects we've with ongoing pipeline or like late stage pipeline, and then the super hairy existing customers? What do we do with people who have renewals coming up in the next 6 months, right? Like, do we move them to the new pricing at renewal? Should we pull forward the renewals from, like, let's say there were renewals early next year when we do plan to be on new incentive plans? Like, do we try to pull all the risk into this current year when at least everyone is on guaranteed pay? Right. And then it was kind of like, for very large customers who are noticing some price changes, how do we message things? Should we have this horrible word exceptions, where we, for some people, like grandfather, like pre-existing pricing? So we kind of had to put together like, and it's difficult to handle everything on a case by case basis. So, we had to put together some like scenarios on, if A happens, then we do this, if B happens. So so like the first thing we did was kind of like document those instances and scenarios with feedback from sales, because they're closest to the customers, and kind of lay that out.
Guaranteed compensation, existing customer impact, renewal scenario planning. If this were only a pricing change, this would be incredibly complicated. It would require an immense amount of planning and work to pull this off. But the pricing change, remember, is only one piece of the puzzle. Aarti's team at Canva was also changing the way they sell entirely. For a business that was built on product-led adoption, you still have these humans that are on your sales team. So at a certain point, one of the questions that Canva needed to answer was, at what point should a human get involved in this sale? To figure this out, you need to plot exactly where your company lives on the product-led to sales-led spectrum that we talked about at the top of the show. Here's Aarti to explain.
The way I think about the world from product-led to traditional enterprise is, there's like this super pure PLG, where in my mind there is no human, right? Like it's just like I think it works best in for products where value is realized in small pockets, right? Like enterprise wide adoption is not really a thing. I think maybe like Calendly way back in the day was like that, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't
Okay.
really need enterprise wide adoption. Great value was accessed in small pockets of solo or maybe even small team usage. It was great. So like no human, right? The only funnel is self-serve. People purchase self-serve. Maybe they do a free trial, maybe they don't. They just buy online, and it's usually like a monthly type comp. So that's like super pure, no human at all. Then somewhere in the middle is this product initiated and sales expanded motion, which I think is where that's also like a pretty wide spectrum. I think Canva was still a little bit more towards the product, to the left of that funnel, right? And then there's like on the far right, it's primarily sales led. Maybe people can buy self serve, but super gated to tiny teams, or there is no self serve at all. So, for example, if it's like an IT SaaS type product, like like security or what have you, where like you have to have enterprise wide adoption, there's no self serve at
Yep.
all, right? Like, so that's kind of the spectrum. So, Canva was not in the super pure, no human part of the spectrum when we made the first change. Basically, where they were at is the primary funnel would be product. So the where we landed is sales would do very minimal or no cold calling. So what that meant is if there was no product bottoms up product adoption in that prospect, they would not even make it to books of business, with a few exceptions. If like super large company, whatever,
Sure.
wish list, dream company, maybe, right? So to answer your question, for new prospects, right, like one of the things that we had to do was just redesign our books of business. So a part of that was what is end, what is mid market, what is SMB, but more importantly, what qualifies a prospect to be in a book of business. So previously it was purely employee count, like your traditional firmographic,
Sure.
like what are our target industries, employee count. But now what we had to do was add in a layer of product usage. So there was a lot of debate on like, what is that magic number? Should it be based on free MAUs, paid MAUs, because there is still this like, so the self-serve, there is the self-serve product, right? So basically what we landed on was, in order to qualify to be in a book of business, you need to meet the firmographic thresholds for end, mid-market, SMB, what have you. But you also need to have this minimum level of product usage. It was, I'm forgetting the exact number, but it was some degree of like paid self-serve users within that company domain. So that was a big change, right? Like, because previously sales teams could basically, they had these massive territories, right? And then they could contact anyone in those territories. And the way we got over that was essentially lay out the value of this like flywheel that we were hoping to create that would make their jobs easier, right? Like cold calling is expensive, it takes time, it takes away time that sales reps could instead use on helping these prospects see value in the product before converting. So there was a lot of like messaging and training that we had to do to kind of like show this value to them. But yeah, the biggest change was territories. Territories became smaller, tighter, and product usage became a marker of territory quality. So when I eventually made books of business, it was like, hey, enterprise will have books of this size where the average paid monthly usage organic would be X and mid-market would be Y and so on. So that was like territory cuts changed a good deal.
And I would imagine when you say the word territory, right? I feel like people have this like static thought in their mind of like, these are my accounts, the accounts do not change. But in this type of model and in this type of environment, I would imagine there is a lot more fluidity required as the number of users and the usage data changes. So how did you account and accommodate for that? Because I mean that those accounts are changing on a daily basis.
Very good question. So again, because this you can't operate this like super pure product led model with a large sales team. So we said, you know what? our books of business will be frozen in like in half year segments, or so we'll do our territories biannually. So we were preparing for 2023, right? Like, so we were like, hey, we'll do one cut of territories in like November, December, see how the first half of the new fiscal year goes, where we're introducing all these new incentive plans and so on. Then do another cut of territories in June for the next 6
Got
months. So we were like, you know what, there could be some fluctuation, but we'll freeze these paid monthly users we are using for territory cutting like twice a year. And so accounts wouldn't disappear from territories. But if during the course of those like 3 to 6 months, some very promising new accounts emerge. So for example, they were in Salesforce, but they were somehow very low in like monthly usage, but because of some uptick in activity. And we also had like a separate product advocate team who was working on accounts not in books of business per this new motion. They would surface these accounts with the relevant firmographic data that had surpassed the usage thresholds. Those would be on a case by case basis added to books, but we didn't expect that flow to be very significant, and it was not.
My biggest takeaway from RT here is that in order to pull off a model switch like this, you need a planning or an ops function within your company that is dynamic. You need to build the agility of this group into your org structure, kind of like the role that RT was hired for. So, how did she and her team's roles change as a result of this business model shift? After the break. As RevOps leaders, our roles require juggling marketing forms, enrichment, and complex lead routing. The entire inner workings of the go-to-market falls on our shoulders. But what if there was an easier way? That's why I'm excited to announce our new sponsor, Default. Imagine this: a lead submits a form on your website. Instantly, Default enriches the contact, intelligently routes different sized companies to different paths, schedules meetings, and logs everything in HubSpot or Salesforce. All automated, all in real time, and perhaps most importantly, all in one place. Visit default.com/Sean Lane today, or click the link in the show notes to learn more and revolutionize your RevOps today. Okay, back to Aarti. Before the break, Aarti was explaining the shift that the Canva ops team had to make to bridge the gap between their highly successful bottoms-up adoption business and the less mature enterprise sales motion. And in doing that, not only did the company's business motion change, but so too did the work of the operations team itself. And Aarti said that they, as operators, embraced this as an opportunity to understand what the new needs within their own team needed to be in order to support this new model.
Previously, there was like a really large like systems team. It was very light on like analytics, right? Like when I joined in the second half of 2022, I was hired to oversee this like transition and guide the team and so on. Like I had to shoulder a lot of like the analytics burden. So I had to kind of hire like an analytics team, because there's so much that can be done with data in a product in this type of hybrid motion, right? So one of the learnings in 2022 is, hey, we need more like analytics, people with with an analytics background in the RevOps team who can partner closely with data science as they figure out what is a product qualified account or a PQA, what is a product qualified lead or a PQL. Like, how do we identify among all these like bottoms up users who could be a decision maker? So that's like, so we needed someone to like closely partner with data science on these items, and also someone who could at a very basic level mine some product info to design these books of business that I shared with you. So that was one need that emerged. The other need was, while we didn't need a deals desk function because pricing was standard, and we realized there were a lot of these exceptions that kind of quasi amounted to having this person who would be the go-to. And hey, yes, we know pricing is uniform, but there was this person who 2 years ago signed a multi-year deal, although they shouldn't have. What do we do, right? Because all those questions can't be ad hoc. They can't all come to your head of sales ops, or it's like, or head of, it's not scalable. People are like, while we have standard pricing, we do need someone who can go in the system, who can make a decision based on frameworks, go into the system, and make that quick override or that quick change, right? Like, so it's kind of like what you were saying, or like you were saying, a rep gets promoted because unfortunately, like, companies' promotion cycles don't align with like your sales planning cycles, right? And like people aren't going to be like, I'm going to hold off on my raise for 3 months while you just
Mhm.
just to keep my book of business or whatever. So it was like, hey, how do you transition accounts from one person to another if they are getting promoted from a mid-market rep with enterprises? So we did kind of need these people who could like interpret our pricing models and our rules of engagement and make like and make like judge and make like informed like judgments on how to adapt to certain like exceptional situations. So in order to make that happen, one thing I had to do was document everything, right? Like say, here's our rules, here's when we change territories, here's what happens if A, B, C, a customer churns because of this pricing. Here's how we protect the reps. Here's what happens when someone moves territories because of, ideally we don't move territories in 6 months. So I had to kind of like, I call them rules of engagement.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's like pretty common, right? But like it's in these changing models, it's really important to have like well documented rules of engagement. And in that 2022 timeframe, like almost every couple of days I was adding to those rules of engagement. Like, oh, this is a scenario we didn't think about, let's like add it in, so we have something codified for 2023. That was the next year. So to answer your question in a nutshell, that time in 2022 was used to figure out what are the needs of the sales ops team, the DevOps team, to support this motion.
Yeah.
Like what can we learn, what can we do to kind of make everything as static as possible for 2023. So let's like figure out all those kinks and nuances now. Of course, that worked like 90%, but there were still things that we learned in 2023 that I'll get to that kind of upended our understanding a little bit. But what we tried to do was use that guaranteed time frame to make decisions for the next year.
Static but flexible is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Static
yeah,
but flexible.
yeah.
Everything you just said about kind of how you design your team and kind of specialize, you need some folks who are going to be more on like the product usage, data analytics side of things. You need folks who are going to be more on the deal desk side of things, or deal management, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
In that first bucket, the thing I think it's important not to gloss over there is that for those data analytics, insights people to be successful, that assumes, one, that all of the plumbing under the hood of where that product usage data comes from and where it goes is set up properly, which is a monster assumption and a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
And then second, now that the team is approaching their day differently, I would imagine which of those product usage insights you chose to surface to them and the manner in which you decided to surface to them also needed to shift. Did you all spend time thinking about, okay, what's the most important information that an AE will need to effectively sell this account?
100%. So we did a lot of work on that prior to 2020, in like the run up to 2023, but then our understanding evolved in 2023 as well. So generally my philosophy in DevOps is don't buy a tool unless you know what data goes into it and how you want to use it, right? Because there's so much vendor bloat everywhere.
Yeah.
So our thought at that time was we won't pump anything into Salesforce because Salesforce isn't equipped, to handle like tons of product data, and there's so much bottoms up adoption. One thought at that time was, should we just pump all bottoms up users into Salesforce? And I was like, no. So what we decided at that time is we are learning now. So let's just have like a BI dashboard. We use Mode, which is kind of like Tableau. We use Mode at the time. So we'll have, and through our data warehouse, we can kind of like pull query data from Salesforce on like book of businesses, account owners, who's the AE, who's the CSM, etc. Then based on domain, join it with product usage data. So we were like, I know it does involve another screen for a rep to look at, but before we dump a ton of stuff into Salesforce or jump the gun and like get a vendor, let's have these Mode source of truth dashboards that show us like PQ. We can go a little bit into PQAs and PQL, but show us like these like number like the accounts which are product qualified per rep and so on. So additionally, now because for some of the metrics that we decided to incentivize the teams on for this like 2023 period, some of those metrics also involve product adoption, because it wasn't just your ARR signed, but we wanted we wanted reps to focus on usage as well, because sometimes in traditional enterprise you can sign these over large deals for like discounts and whatever, but there's not much usage. So when the time for renewal happens, like there's a big hit, right? So we also wanted to incentivize them on usage data again, which Salesforce is not the source of truth. So even for their like performance reporting, we had to pivot from basic Salesforce like bookings type reports, which was the norm before, into ARR and usage type reports, which we had to query from this union of Salesforce and more. So what we decided is for the first half of 2023, all our product usage and product qualifying data, and also all our performance data would be queried via SQL and displayed in as user friendly a manner as possible using these BI dashboards.
That's amazing.
That had to evolve in 2023, and I'll chat about that in a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love the approach though, right? Of, hey, we got to figure this out. Let's not force everything into Salesforce, because, one, it's the lift of getting everything in there, but two, I think the bigger potential ripple effect there is you're kind of experimenting in front of everybody. And then everyone starts to lose faith in what they see, because at the beginning, it's not going to be perfect, right? And so kind of having this in-between stage and mode to test, experiment, verify that the plumbing is actually working correctly and the product usage data you're looking at is even right.
Yeah.
Like having that intermediate step, I think makes a ton of sense. You've alluded to this idea of a PQL multiple times. Can you help folks understand what that is and how you all decided to define it?
Yeah. So I think when this like furor around like PLG happened a couple of years ago, everyone just thought about these like, your like the utopia is like every day you're getting these like warm leads, and like sales goes after these leads and you can sign a deal so fast. And
that's how it works.
That's how it works. Yeah. These leads were called product qualified leads, which meant like, I think like the utopian definition is that they have experienced this aha moment or this value from the product, and they are like, oh, so ready, to sign a deal. But in reality, like identifying them is like not that straightforward. So while our reports initially were called PQL reports, what they actually showed were like product qualified accounts. So because we weren't at that time in our Rev 1 surfacing leads, because we still expected sales to research on LinkedIn, use Sales Navigator and so on, and find a decision maker, right? So we were like, here are product qualified accounts. So what we try to do is, for every rep, every book of business, right? Like we stack rank accounts based on certain parameters, like changes in design usage of certain features like collaboration, or there were like, it was a design platform. So there were like, just like anecdotally and also based on some data that we had, like certain like high value like actions that like are taken, right? Like sharing a design or publishing a design or adding new members into a team, right? Like these are like high value actions taken that kind of show that people are maybe the company is maybe ready for the next step. So we kind of like bucketed like a couple of like high value actions, decided that we kind of look at like month on month or sometimes week on week changes of this, and like averaged out those deltas. And then for every book of business, stack ranked prospects based on these product qualified account scores. So what actually we did was the first rev just showed product qualified, it's stack ranked accounts based on product usage, right? Like, so it wasn't really PQLs. We were like, what is the word for this? We said, okay, PQA, which is product qualified accounts. Then, and obviously, understandably, we're all trying to do our best, right? But like, it's not fun to do your work for a sales rep to do all this new stuff with Salesforce and go to a dashboard. So there was a lot of grumbling. It's like, oh, my time is so valuable, which I get. So, so then so then somewhere like in Q1 of 2023, we're like, hey, let's start like ideating. How do we make this thing better, right? So we're like, hey, are there certain scores that we can pipe into Salesforce, knowing that these scores change, right? Like,
Sure.
so we also had to do a lot of like educating on like how to read these scores, where is the score most recent, because Salesforce only updates once every 24 hours. There are all sorts of like data lags and everything, the plumbing, like you said, that makes it so hard. So we were like, okay, we'll pump these scores into Salesforce, but then people were like, but then who do I reach out to? Like, sure, they'll do their research on like Sales Navigator, but one core part of this motion was finding a product champion, right? Like, so that champion is usually someone who may or may not have full like buying decision power, but someone who can at least like introduce us to the right parties, right? But so those product champions are usually users. We were like, how do we surface those users in a good way to sales so they can put them in their outreach sequences? And so that's when we started thinking more about what is a PQL, right? Like, so again, that required a lot of like, pouring through like a lot of data. And we were like, okay, there has to have within these product qualified accounts, there will have to be these users who maybe we have some title info about them, because sometimes when you sign up on Canva, it asks like, what is your role? So you were like, hey, if someone's like intern but using it a lot, then maybe we don't like qualify them as a lead. So there was like a bunch of various like parameters. If they're an admin, yes, that's a good sign, right? Like if they have, we do have like title info about them and they seem to be manager and above, that's a good sign. Obviously, if they're using the data a lot, so we kind of had to be a little creative in figuring out who are the people that we want to surface to sales so that they can find this product champion who can then connect the dots and introduce the CMO or, like let's say some companies like HR was using Canva a lot, but some companies, obviously marketing, PR, right? Like who could then introduce to those like VP level people who likely wouldn't be users, right?
Right.
So that kind of led to the evolution of within these product qualified accounts. What are these like? How do we identify these PQLs, right? And then there were all these like little exceptions. Oh, can you have a PQL if it's not a PQA, or can you have a PQA? But there's all these like little edge cases. Yeah. So that's kind of the evolution of PQAs to PQL.
I hope you're taking notes or you're going to go back and run this episode through your favorite AI note taker, because Aarti is giving us such a detailed tactical breakdown here, warts and all. She's outlined a blueprint for how to use this treasure trove of data that's available in a product-led business to your advantage. But she's also telling us that that does not come without its pitfalls. First, you need to make sure that your plumbing is working and that the data you're surfacing is reliable. She used Mode as her own kind of testing ground to prove that out. Next, you need to align on definitions and buying signals so that when you go to your sales team with meaningful product usage events, everyone knows what those events mean and what to do with them next. Put all of that together with the pricing changes and the new sales team responsibilities, and you're asking for a lot. By the way, I think it's brilliant that they were able to de-risk people's comp for a 6-month period of time. They basically guarantee that they would encourage folks to work together towards solving all of these problems instead of freaking out when things inevitably went wrong. Kudos to the leadership team there for making what I'm sure was a difficult call at the time. But what happens after those 6 months? What happens when things got real? What broke? What happened that she didn't expect? Aarti told us that just about every aspect of the team's cross-functional collaboration needed to change.
Obviously, everyone is like super optimistic and enthusiastic and wants to make it work. But hey, come Jan 1, your pay is at stake. And, also everyone's like, we had to roll out like new incentive plans. So people's metrics are different, right? Like the even roles and responsibilities change. Like AEs and CSMs now had different metrics, but some shared some metrics that influenced each other. So it just required a whole new level of like collaboration. So not only were there like day-to-day changing in terms of pricing, product offering, what they do in Salesforce, but even the way they interacted with their peers changed, and their comp is changing.
Mm.
So I mean, the good things that happened is, we had like proofread all their books of business, like socialized them all, like so much that like there was a little bit of flux early Jan because maybe some late December renewals didn't work out as we had planned. But like all of that, we kind of, so by basically like second week of Jan, people had like 99% final
That's
books
awesome.
of business. So all that was great. Now, things that we learned is, hey, actually, not having a contact sales button on your website is not a great idea, because sometimes, like, your books of business, you might have missed a subsidiary of a big company that wants to use Canva. So that account is not in a sales rep's books of business, so it's not showing in like the
Mm.
PQA, all these beautiful reports, right? And they're using Canva. They've gotten to the point where they want to speak to someone. How do they get in touch with you? So then, there were all these prospects trying, which is a good problem to have, right? Trying to contact sales on LinkedIn, right? So then come like 1 or 2 months in, we were like, hey, not having this contact sales button is just leaving so much
Oh my
opportunity on the
gosh.
table, right? So that had to change. So somewhere in March, we're like, how do we, that contact sales button, which is now like grayed out, hyperlinked, like a little footnote somewhere on the pricing. How do we kind of like up level back there, back up level that back to the pricing page, right? Like it's so that, and then that resulted in like a new flow of leads, right? That were, now we kind of call them MQLs, although we didn't have MQLs, we only
Mm.
had PQLs, right? So that was a new flow that had to be like quasi qualified and then assigned. So that was a thing to figure out, but a good problem, right? Because it's like more inflow. So that was one learning. The second learning was like actually, you do need a separate SKU for enterprise, right? Like, because your, I mean, yes, like I think it was a very beautiful, like utopian vision to have like three super simple SKUs. But hey, your mom and pop like grocery store where like a team of 5 is using Canva, it's going to be different from like a large company where like multiple teams of 100 are using the product, right? Like, so that that took longer to evolve. So that only fully changed towards the end of 2023. But like that was a big learning. Hey, like the pricing isn't really like serving enterprise customers, right? Like,
Mm.
and some enterprise customers, they need volume based discount. Like they're used to this, right? Like it's also like there's this ideal world, but this is what teams are used to, and especially in a difficult economy, like companies are like, hey, I would buy your product, it is cheap, but I plan to use like 5,000 seats or like 10,000 seats. What am I getting, right? Like, so
Yep.
there was this, like, it was almost like it wasn't even like we hadn't thought about this in planning. It was just like a learning on where on that product to that, that middle spectrum, the middle part of that spectrum, like where along that you kind of want to lie. So that was a big learning. And then third, in terms of operationalizing, this we knew would be kind of a problem, but the extent of the problem like surprised me. It's like this difficulty in like looking at a mode report or BI report, then doing some stuff in Salesforce. I mean, the amount of time me and my team spent in that year, like explaining the 1 day data lag to people, like, I'm like,
Mm.
okay, but I get it because, like, especially on the last day of the quarter when, like, like our commissions were paid every quarter, like people are rushing to get deals
Yep.
and they're like, I don't know, I thought my number would go from 98 to 102%. It's still at 99. What do I do? Right. So this whole like look in multiple places, that was a problem. The second is, there was a lot of manual work that was being done by sales because they'd get their qualified accounts from here. They'd have to manually look up the leads and outreach and send these sequences. So a lot of time was spent in admin. So those were like, I think, the big three pockets of learning. So the third, I just, so yeah, so it was kind of like this contact sales button, the price, the kind of like the SKUs and pricing issue, and then all this like where do I see my data and how can I kind of make it as real time as possible, and then how do I remove like the admin load on sales. Those were like the big four pockets of learning.
And I would imagine, the decision to do this, right? If we go way back to the beginning, the decision to do this at a strategic level is ultimately to increase revenue, increase efficiency, increase productivity per rep. Do you feel like now, looking back, bumps and all, were you able to point 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later at whether or not this was the right call for the business at that moment in time?
Yeah. So I would say the high level, the leadership directive was better customer experience, right? And replicate B2C success B2B. Like I don't think they were thinking so much about things like productivity per rep, which we did when we operationalized it, those were core metrics for the go-to-market team, but that wasn't necessarily the leadership directive.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
So, but looking back, I think so a lot of things helped, right? Like, so one thing is like over time, win rates improved. They did, right? It was a bumpy road, but like, hey, being able to identify these like warm leads, it did result in shorter sales cycles, right? The second thing that we didn't speak about too much here is like the impact on like expansion of existing customers. So we spoke a lot about like the new business side of the house, but this product qualified approach also really helped in like these other motions aside from land, like expand and consolidate. So there was a big consolidation motion where like, you have a renewal, but then now with all this product data, you see, hey, there's all these multiple pockets of usage. How can I kind of like bring them in and really expand on this renewal? So expansions on renewals did significantly better. Now, in terms of things like productivity per rep, like I would love to say those improved, but like I think you need like multiple years of like at least like more than 2 years of data to kind of see significant improvements in that. And the thing is like in this evolutionary change, like evolutionary phase, as these motions are changing, it's actually really hard to compare apples to apples in terms of like how productive what is productivity per rep. Like thinking back to like my previous years, like Glassdoor and so on, where like we did have multiple years of like, like sales data, right? Like there we were able to compare, hey, how much more productive did an AE get? Like how much more efficient did renewals get? But I don't think like in more like nascent go-to-market motions, that comparison can be done, but it's not really apples to apples. So I wish I could say I knew efficiency increased. I'm not sure. I can say though that like more granular metrics like win rates improved, deal cycles reduced, and growth on renewals improved in spite of the overall pricing reductions.
Before we go, at the end of each show, we're going to ask each guest the same lightning round of questions. Ready? Here we go. Best book you've read in the last 6 months?
Oh, I mostly only read fiction for
That's
fun.
fine.
Yeah. But I read this book called How High We Go in the Dark it's by I actually forget the author's name, but How High We Go in the Dark. It's this amazing book on the world post pandemic. Not the pandemic we went through, but it's like a weird kind of zombie type pandemic, and it's just like so beautiful and so heartwarming. Like,
all right.
Oh, I would actually read it again. It's called How High We Go in the Dark. I love it.
I love it. All right, I'll put it on the list.
Yeah.
Favorite part about working in ops?
I think it's seeing like immediate change, and I would like to say immediate value. Because I feel like it is kind of like what you do takes immediate effect, and I think that's something I have come to appreciate.
Flip side, least favorite part about working in ops?
Yeah, it can be like pretty contentious, like I got some grades over the years. And you kind of have to feel like you're like on the front lines helping sales, but also defending your RevOps team. So that part can get kind of tiring. Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Someone who impacted you getting to the job you have today?
I would say it's probably multiple people. I think like there have been a couple of like CROs who have been instrumental in me kind of getting here. One was the head of sales at Canva, who hired me into my role there, and previously like some like VPs of RevOps who have taken chances of me and like helped me like build and grow a team. So I think it's like hard to point like one person, but like multiple like bosses and mentors, both in sales and RevOps, kind of help shape my career. Yeah.
All right, last one. One piece of advice for people who want to have your job someday.
I think it's a little cliched, but it is a marathon, not a sprint, right? Like, so I think you have to pick your battles, right? Like sometimes, you know, you want to be like really like utopian and do everything perfectly. That is like not going to be possible. So you have to acknowledge that like out of a team of like 100 salespeople, 5 people are going to be really mad at you for something, and that's okay, right? Like, so it's just acknowledging that like you cannot make everyone happy, right? Like, and you have to pick who you want to make happy, right? So sometimes if I'd open my computer and there'd be like 10,000 Slack messages, despite all the things on like, these are the appropriate channels for deal support, like ultimately everything's an emergency, everything goes to the head of DevOps, right? Like triage, like whose answering whose message will make your life easier today. And often, I mean, it sounds bad, but like, hey, if your CRO messages you, answer them, right? Like, if like a rep messages you because they think one account in their book of business is an employee count that's 5% off, that can wait. So it's just kind of like you can't please everyone. Just triage and know that someone will be unhappy with you every day.
Thanks so much to Aarti for joining us on this week's episode of Operations. If you liked what you heard, make sure you are subscribed to our show so you get a new episode in your feed every other Friday. Also, if you learned something from Aarti or from any of our guests, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps people to find the show. 6-star reviews only. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.